This man has never knocked nobody out cold. He's a bully. He's slow. He has no skill, no footwork. He's awkward. And I have been giving him a name. Because he fights. When he's fighting, if you ever watch him in the ring, he drags like that after his opponent. And how's the mummy gonna catch me?
And all I had to do was to go out and beat a man who had no skill, no class. Seriously, the man had no skill. I don't know why the world is so foolish to believe in him and think that I wasn't going to win.
Well, when you say you're ready to go to war right now...
I see that guy on the street, I beat him before the fight.
You'd actually take him on before the fight?
Beat him like I'm his daddy.
Basketball players out there, football players, they want to beat so bad, they want to get everybody. I'll go to Mars, I don't care.
For the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world, let's get ready to rumble!
Okay. Hello, guys. Sorry about the technical difficulties we've been having here. But my name is Tperfect. Welcome to another episode of Equilibrium, part of the podcast or the Lights Out Sports Debate Network. Okay. And yeah, sorry for the delay. Definitely experiencing technical difficulties, like Rex pointed out here. So we are go now, and just wanted to go ahead and today talk about what it means to have a criteria. Obviously, this is a very nuanced discussion, and it means a lot of different things to different people, especially when we're talking about what we generally take it for, which is when you're ranking players in not only basketball but any and all sports. Okay, what do you use to do it? Obviously, everyone has. If you do choose to go ahead and rank players, and obviously not everyone does, and it's whatever, that's your right. But if you don't choose to not do it, or if you choose to do it, usually go by a set of standards that you personally have come up with, and you may have gotten those standards through, just your own research, other people's opinions, things like that. It really depends on what you're exposed to, how far your bias goes, your appreciation for a team, a player, a set of numbers, whatever the case is. So what we'll do today is I'll share a little bit of what I consider, or basically what I use in order to rank a little bit, or to rank players, specifically talking about the NBA. Okay, And in this case, we'll go through and hopefully we can, if we don't have anyone in the chat sharing what their criteria is, we can, everyone comment down below, like and subscribe, and tell me what your personal criteria or set of standards is when you're using it to rank NBA players. Okay. So, like I said before, it's a very contentious topic. And especially when we're talking about, the quote unquote GOAT debate, or just when you're trying to share. And we saw a little bit of blowback from when Bleacher Report kind of shared their top 100 recently, right? When they were talking about, we saw their top 100 NBA players of all time. We saw the specific order because it was ordered according to who they believed was the greatest player. And they didn't really have a ton in the way of criteria, and the ones they did share was very all over the place. Now, what I've always said is that if somebody comes up to me and has a specific criteria that they use to consistently rank their players, I won't criticize or kind of break down that criteria because it's theirs. They have one. It's what they personally use to rank players, or it's what they value, when they're looking at the career of said players. Okay. Now, however, if you don't have a criteria and all you're doing is sitting there and criticizing someone else's ranking system when they do, then that's where we have an issue. That's where we, kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, if you're just giving your 2 cents about somebody else's criteria and you're not taking the time to develop your own system, your own set of rules, your own metric or standard, then, you haven't done the effort. So you really don't get to have a take on somebody else's. Okay. So a couple of things here just to get down to brass tacks. A couple of things that I use personally, and I know these are pretty universal, but it really just depends on how heavily you weigh them, things like that, are, of course, we use numbers. We use stats, accolades, and achievement, especially when we're talking in the NBA, all right, although it applies everywhere. Stats, accolades, and achievement do things like context. A lot of people, when I use stats and accolades and achievements, okay, that really encompasses their entire career. When you go beyond that, you start talking about things like, I've heard people say, context of who they were facing, or, especially when you talk about like finals MVP rings. And one thing that is true is that you do play, the object of the game is to win the game, or the object of when you play sports. Okay. Now, that being said, when I do believe that, and I will kind of throw my own bias into the mix here because it's, no one's devoid. We all have it. I do believe that the ring count, when you're talking about players who have, when you're talking about the all-time greats, we all know who that is. All those people are. There's a short list. When you're talking about ring count and you use them to elevate certain players, that's fine. I mean, if you do it consistently. I personally don't believe in using just sheer ring count to say this player was better than that player or the end-all, be-all. I use everything. If they have more finals MVPs, that means they were the lead dog on, sure, maybe their team was better a majority of the time compared to some others, but they were still that transcendent player typically, especially if they consistently excelled and were able to garner that award. Okay. That being said, obviously we know that it's a team game like anything else typically, especially and we know that it takes, especially when you're talking about, and I mentioned this in the beginning, consistently winning, and especially when you're considering talking about consistently winning championships. Okay. That's something that is the hardest thing to do in North American sports, is to be a consistently great team, not only in terms of just winning regular season wins and win percentage, but bringing home that trophy at the end of the day. And shout out to, we have Woodage, Politicus Rex, and GoCast Tube. Shout out, guys. Welcome to an episode of Equilibrium. And feel free, guys, to give us your take in the chat there. Again, like I said, we're talking about criteria. What matters to you? Do you have a criteria? I know that really Rex has, I like Rex's takes on that. We know where he stands. It's just not really any GOAT. And that's a great talk. That's a really good stance. As he's backed that up plenty of times. He's explained that. He doesn't really believe there is a GOAT in team sports because everyone plays a role. Everyone's vital to some capacity. and it's usually the best team wins, and that is a fantastic point. And you can't really refute that because it's very true. And we've seen that throughout history, especially when we're talking about the dynasties. Okay, and so when you are talking about things that are team sports, that's true. Like I said, it's really just not. There's no one man who gets up there and dominates and does everything by himself. Regardless of what sport you're talking about, especially the case in basketball. And so we've seen that be true. The best teams always win. Was Russell arguably the best Celtic during his championship run? Sure, arguably, especially from a defensive standpoint, but he was part of an outstanding team, and that was true basically throughout his entire career. Fantastic teams, look at the names, things like that. Same thing with all the dynasties we were talking about throughout history. Larry Bird's team was very arguably the best throughout the 80s, on par with Magic Johnson's teams. We saw the Sixers be ascendant sometimes. I mean, obviously you had great teams during the regular season there too, and they just couldn't get past. You had Utah Jazz for some of those years, Dallas Mavericks, all these players, Detroit Pistons. All these players that had various levels of success all enjoyed a great roster, from time to time, whether it be 1-2 years or like we saw on some of the teams I just mentioned, on some of the dynasty years. And we saw these teams were the best teams from 1 to 12, and obviously then we had the best players. Okay. That being said, go back to the point where if you are going to take the time and choose to rank these players, we're going to have, like I said, we come to this point where, what do you use? Okay. So for me, as I explained, I was using basically the entirety and the breadth of your resume, which is your accolades and achievements and your stats. Okay. Now, obviously, there's things to be said for rule changes, things like that, what era you played in, things that affect players. And that is also, I do not believe the argument, okay, that one era was so much harder to dominate in than the other. So players who played in certain areas deserve special consideration when you're ranking. I think that's a ridiculous argument. And because every single player who played in any era, regardless of what it was, they did not have any special advantages given to them in order to help them succeed. You beat what was in front of you. You were subject to the same rules, the same regulations as every other player who played with you. Okay. And so that being said, you were on an even playing field from the second you laced them up and came in the league to the second you left. Okay. It's what you did that set you apart. Okay. Now, if you want to use the error argument and you want to use things like that's when I challenge you to come up with a criteria that incorporates fairly incorporates all these things that you say matter. I've heard people use competition, lack thereof, to either raise or demote players, things like that. I couldn't agree with that less, okay? Because, like I said, that's just me personally. I don't believe it's fair because, like I said, you beat who's in front of you. There was competition at the highest level for every single player, every single team, and that competition became the best competition by beating who was in front of them, abiding by the same rules and context of that era, okay? We don't play time machine basketball here, as Dart loves to say. So, if you love to do that and you love to rank players by who they beat or who they lost to, feel free to again come up with a ranking that goes 1 through 10. Okay, and feel free to share that with me. I would love to hear it, and that's what we're all here about. And not just Equilibrium, the show here, but everyone else. When we chop it up on Sundays, we love to hear topics. We're gonna have you guys up here to give your takes. We're not gonna berate you or anything like that, but just make sure that it's consistent when you're doing this, okay? If it only applies to 1 or 2 players and you don't think, and you can't apply to 4 through whatever the case is, then we're really going to, ask you some tough questions, ask you to, kind of lay that out and define why it is that you're using that as your criteria, okay? So, and this is, obviously we've heard all the takes, all the bad takes, such as, people using things like, oh, you know what? This guy faced tougher competition. Things like, and generally it's to bump up. I'm not going to run away from it. Guys like for example, LeBron James. Okay, I love LeBron. Where I have him ranked, but when somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh, I think LeBron faced the best competition. That's why he's number 1 to me," but I can guarantee you that person And Rex, we would love to hear your top 10 and discuss it. Absolutely, 100%. That's what we're all here for. And I think, I think we do. All of us would do a special show just for that. But when I hear players do, someone says that, and that's actually, you hear that take everywhere across media, Facebook, whatever. Wherever you look, you hear things like, like that. I have LeBron James number one because he has a best. You hear that take. I think that's one of the worst takes ever, because subjectively, there's no way to prove that team or those sets or those opponents were the toughest in history. Okay, and you can go down the line, and every player has faced their share of, like I've spoke about ad nauseum, tough competition in one form or another, whether it's teams that excelled offensively, defensively, both for their era. That's who you go against. You're not the 96 Bulls. You're not going to face the 2020 Bucks. That's not going to happen. You're not going to be the 1983 Sixers going against the 2018 Warriors. That's not going to happen. Okay, you face who's in front of you. They are the best that time, that season. Okay, it's ridiculous to actually fault players and knock them because of who they did not play. Okay, now we measure up about what they did in their era, how they dominated their peers. Okay, and those teams that were assembled then. Okay, now again, that's why I tend to get away from that. I don't care who you played, who you didn't play. When I'm ranking my players, my top 10, I go by the total width and breadth of your resume, how you dominated your peers, okay, and the NBA recognized awards, accolades, achievements that you collected. Okay. Now, obviously, that's not a perfect solution. That's not a perfect criteria, and at least something to be desired. I've always said that if everything was created equal, and these things that I use were available, like analytics, if they were available from the beginning of time, very first iteration of basketball up until now, then I think guys like Wilt and Bill Russell would be the GOATs, and we couldn't even discuss it. Wouldn't be a conversation. They would be just a vying for, it would be 1A, 1B, and then who comes next. Okay, because they would have dominated those awards to such a degree. I'm talking DPOYs, first team all defense, block titles, steal titles, things like that. You would have scored, or you would have had. It would have been such a gap between them, statistically and analytically, and as far as just sheer accolades went, we wouldn't have the conversation. They would be, in a lot of ways, they still are a class by themselves. Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain. When you have, someone with 11 rings, very clearly the most impactful defender of all time. If we lose those numbers, Will Chamberlain is a statistical marvel in his own sense. Really, he is the record book, and I don't think that's a slight on any player to say. This man will, a lot of things that he solidified will never be touched or approached, especially when you're talking about seasonal time. Just the way he dominated from both ends, night in, night out. But I have them aside because, it's more fun to talk about players who did have access to these awards. Okay. So that being said, what's interesting to me is not really telling you what I think, or telling you my top 10, my criteria, because you've heard it before. I've done a lot of debates. I've talked to a lot of people, and I've talked to, we're going to do it again, obviously, since we're all going to be on the shows going forward here, especially, Sundays, you'll hear it from other contexts. Rex and Dar going to, take care of that on Saturdays, things like that. You'll hear us espouse as the leaders of this channel and show what our top. I want to hear from you guys. What is if you do choose to rank players, that's your right. How do you do it? What do you look at? That's what I find interesting. That's what I like to chop up. And so, that being said, like I said, I personally use analytics, things like that. So my top 5, and I always like to say no particular order, but I do have an order. I have it LeBron, Mike, Kareem, Duncan, Hakeem. Okay. But like I said, that's just mine personally. And then from then on, it goes Shaq, Kobe, Larry, Magic, and Steph Curry. So, like I said, I have the asterisks on Bill and Will. They're default GOATs, but like I said, my ranking system doesn't, it accounts for a broader range of things that we use here that weren't available to them, unfortunately. But like I said, and those gentlemen to me are that I just mentioned are 5 of the best, not only two-way players of all time, but they were so impactful to their teams. And I realized that guys like Hakeem Olajuwon only have 2 rings and weren't, obviously when I say only have 2 rings, it's relative to these other guys. But when I say he was by far one of the more impactful players in NBA history, I'm talking, on both offensively and defensively, what he meant to his team. Okay. Obviously, I'm not going to say, you only have 2 rings, your career is lessened to me. No, it's like, what did you do on the court? What did you mean to me? I don't care about the end result. End result's great. But as we discussed, it takes a whole lot to get to not only the championship 1 year, but to consistently be in that conversation. But are you going to win the championship? Are you going to back-to-back, 3-peat, whatever the case is? Hakeem not only 2-peated, but he did have, like I said, go look at the metrics, go look at the analytics, go look at his just on the force he was, not only in both ends of the court, but especially defensively when you rank him. That means a lot to me when I go over when I look at your resume. Obviously, he has the accolades and he has the all-defensive first teams. He has the all-defensive awards. He has the DPOY, the MVP. So those things matter to me more so than what the sheer ring count is. Okay. Now, and that also, that's why I have guys like John Stockton, Karl Malone, to a degree. I realize that he won some rings, but, not 6 or 7, like I said, Moses Malone. Guys like, who else we got here? Guys like Dirk. I have these guys all very highly rated, even though their championship success was very minimal or even non-existent. Okay, because of how great they were, what they meant to their teams, and what their teams did without them, before and since, things like that. And so, like I said, it's a nuanced conversation. And like I said, the take that I was mainly interested in focus on today, and what we've done to some degree, was to the point where we talk about time machine basketball. When people say, they didn't face anyone in the 60s, or 60s had no competition, or, I hate Michael Jordan, there's no competition in the 90s. When you hear someone say that, okay, that means A, they don't know basketball, and B, they have an agenda. They're not trying to be a fan. They're not trying to talk to you about the sport. They're just trying to push a narrative. Okay. In this case, if they say that they hate the 60s, it's that they haven't done research, they don't appreciate basketball, or they say that about the 90s, they hate a certain player and they're trying to elevate another player. They probably started watching the game recently, got swept up in the recency bias that a lot of people have, not just for LeBron James, talking just in general. You see that all over the place. You see, you see everyone talk about what they believe is, are the best players. They really don't want to do any research or acknowledge the greats of the past and how they championed the game, brought it along to where it is now. And that to me, that's really the sign of a complete and utter casual, someone that really doesn't want to understand or learn the game. They just they're in love with a certain player. That's really it. Okay. Rex says, I think the top 3 teams, maybe ever, says we're 83 Sixers. I assume it's ever. 86 Celtics. And so, yes. Teams italicized. That's hard to argue that. We saw what the 72 Lakers did with, I believe it was 33 game winning streak, and they won the championship there. That was one of the best collections of talent ever assembled. You have Jerry West, you had John Wilkes, you had Will Chamberlain, obviously, or Robert to a degree. But you had, or Elgin Baylor to a degree, rather, but that was one of the better teams of all time. The way you saw them, especially guys like Will Chamberlain, sacrificing his game to raise that team to the next level, to really, to the benefit. That's one season that goes down as maybe still the best ever. 86 Celtics, same way. Always one of my favorite teams to debate, to discuss, especially when they got Bill Walton to be the 6th man that year, really put him over the top. You have a former MVP coming off the bench, and and then you saw a lot of the other players coalescing in their talent that year. Larry Bird MVP, amazing, and obviously one of the better Sixer teams of all time, if not the best one, I think. When you had multiple people competing for a DPOY, you had MVP. You had that team was also loaded, and that was one of Dr. J's last hurrahs. But that was still, I think, one of the better teams. I would put that, and I say this all the time, the balance that 83 Sixer team had, I would put that up against, you look at any other team, really, because they could do everything. They could play defense. They could post you up. They had shooters. And that was a team that I think is, I don't want to say that it's relatively unknown, because I think for a lot of the basketball aficionados that we have, we have really realized how great that team was. And, I mean, it was, if anything, I dare say underrated. And, it's one thing that we talk about. Obviously, they won the championship. That goes without saying, won the championship. But, I mean, they were top 10 in both offense and defensive rating. And, I mean, the roster itself doesn't give it justice. But you had Moses Malone, Irving, Maurice Cheeks out there, Andrew Toney, Bobby Jones, won Sixth Man of the Year. And, I mean, it was, you had Moses Malone, MVP form, 15 rebounds, 10 defensive rebounds, and almost 6 off. I mean, ridiculous. So, great team. And, I mean, to Rex's point, yeah, it's the teams that win and are consistently winning. Okay, it's a team. It's not one man. You see a lot of players, and, I mean, this is throughout history. You see a lot of greats who didn't really have any success. I mentioned Malone. I mentioned Barkley. Guys like guys like Malone, Barkley's there. Charles Barkley. I mean, great example. You had, guys who had maybe just one ring, like Dirk. I mean, guys who were maybe just generally loyal. Steve Nash, loyal to teams, didn't have a lot of success because of the situation. Does that affect your ranking of them? Okay, to me, it does not. I want to know how impactful it is. Okay. So, we had a lot of here for it. And, shout out Dart and everyone else here. Thanks for joining. And like I said, we're talking today about what is your criteria? Mine, we've gone over mine here, but, I want to know what yours is. What's your take overall on people who come up with these bad narratives? Okay. Like the one I just broke down and, kind of brought to rest is the narrative about how they rank based on eras in competition that you didn't. I think that's very disingenuous. The players don't come into the NBA picking what year they'll play. They don't pick who they'll play against. They don't pick who they won't play against. This is out of their control. And when you rank players, you should never rank them on something they cannot control. Okay, that's ridiculous. So, that being said, I will go ahead just very briefly and drop the link if anyone wants to come up and just lightly touch on what they believe is, what they think of this topic. Specifically, if they don't rank players, whatever, but the criteria, and specifically the point where we know that people today dock other players when they're ranking them or not ranking them about their era or competition they played in. That's the bad topic that we're kind of dispelling today and bringing back to an equilibrium, okay, where they're trying to play time machine basketball and just be disingenuous ambassadors to the game. Okay, so what do you think about that? And so with that, to me, it's, you can't really, you can't really use that as a criteria, because one thing also is your criteria doesn't really matter, and we'll dismiss it out of hand if it doesn't apply fairly up and down the line to each and every player who you consider to be great. Okay. And now you can't just throw a bunch of names up there, because on this show and this program, especially on, we will call you out. We'll ask you to break down and explain your list if you have a criteria and you presented this to us. If you've taken the time to make a criteria and a list, great. That's on you. That's fantastic. That's half the battle. We appreciate that. But make sure it is consistent, okay, to all players, free from those sort of bias, okay? And that's really it. So that being said, we do have Politicus Rex here. And, hey, man, how you doing, Rex? What's your weigh-in on, obviously, the criteria? And I know that you've talked at length at some point about, these bad narratives that we see about people trying to knock players for when they play.
Well, when you're talking about criteria, this is why I always say that there is no subjective answer to, or no objective answer, because even no one can even agree on a criteria, on a formula, much less on the answer to the formula. And that's what always cracks me up when you hear people say the eye test. Well, what does the eye test mean? The eye test is only as accurate as the person whose eyes they are. If I put in the comments, my mom has an eye test. She could watch a game and
Oh, looks like we lost him. Not sure if that's. Feel free to hit back up here, Rex. But I mean, I agree. That's the point that he just made was, there's whatever. Even if you have a great criteria, it's still subjective. It's still subjective to to some degree, your personal bias. And there's Rex. We got him back.
yeah, sorry about that. I got bumped.
No
I'm
problem.
trying to cut off some stuff and see if for some reason this started with me and Dart a few months ago, that for some reason now my phone just keeps kicking me off.
Oh,
So
okay, got it.
I try and shut everything down to see if it'll last.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah,
But
please, by all means, continue with what you're saying.
well, I don't know how much y'all heard, but like when you sit there and you talk about the eye test, is like, well, that's totally dependent on the person's eyes that's looking. I mean, Jerry West's eye test is different than yours. Red Auerbach's eye test is different than Stephen A. Smith or mine. Or like my mom, who would sit and watch basketball and knew nothing about it. She can have an eye test. Doesn't mean she's right. Doesn't mean she has a clue. So when people say, oh, I only go by the eye test, well, I don't even know you. I don't know how much you know about the game. I don't know if your eye test means anything.
No, that's a great point. And yeah, like I was saying, I mean that's true. Up and down the board, I mean that's like whatever you're saying, like the eye test, everything that we use criteria has a degree of, subjectivity. And like you said, there's absolutely no, and never going to be any subjective way to consistently rank players that doesn't have a modicum of bias and subjectivity somewhere, whether that's how hard or where you how high you measure these accolades and achievements, like what percent, where do you rank them as far as what you value the most. That's bias. Okay, your eye test, like Rex said, is a bias to a degree because you're looking for different things. You don't really look at a player and say, oh, okay, I have, you measure them against their players. Like, no, you're looking for different things. Different things impress you. And yeah, Rex, I know she lost you, man. But we're about to wrap up here anyway. We'll see if we get it fixed by Sunday, and you can join us on the show for sure. But in conclusion, guys, really what I was going to say is that, like Dart said, or like Rex said, everything that we use when we talk about criteria or ranking is going to be, to some degree, biased based upon your personal tendencies, what you like, what you value personally. What we ask here is that when you do come with a list and a criteria, because at the end of the day, we do it to, for fun. We do it to dissect each other's opinions, what they thought, to talk about the players in the game. And when we do talk about that, your bias or your criteria needs to be one that, if anything else, it can be whatever you want, but it needs to be applicable to each and every player that you decide to rank beyond. Okay, if it's not, then we'll sniff that out pretty quick. Okay, but that being said, next week we're gonna have another. I'm gonna try to up the production value a little bit. We're gonna have a little bit more of a hotter take, hotter little myth there that we need to go ahead and dispel. And it's a take that I've been wanting to tackle for a little while. And now we got a variance here. We'll try and go ahead and do that, and hopefully come back to a place of equilibrium. Okay, where we can just be true basketball fans, free of, where we can meet in the middle and discuss the game in a fair way. Okay. So again, my name is Tperfect. I am your host every Friday night of Equilibrium. And thank you for everyone in the chat. Thank you, Rex, for coming up here and giving your 2 cents there. And everyone in the chat here, Woodage. We had Dart show up, Rex. We had basketball work here. Go Cast Tubes, appreciate that showing up there. And everyone else, feel free to like. If you're just seeing this, feel free to like and subscribe, and you'll be joining the Lights Out Sports Debate Network. We'll come at you every week and weekend with fresh content where we talk the basketball and various other coordinates here as well. Okay. And with that being said, sign off, and we'll see everyone here on Sunday. Okay. Have a good one.